Okay.
Okay, so this is the endorsement conversation for Oregon House District 42. Representative Noss, if you're the incumbent, so if you could start by giving us a brief summary of who you are, your biography, and why it is you're seeking re-election.
Sure. I believe as the incumbent, I'm a proven progressive who has stood up against corporate interests of our state and won, and that's one of the main reasons why I should be reelected. I've pretty much been an activist all my adult life. I got my start in Ohio, restarting a student association that worked to unite college students to fight for equal rights and to help lower tuition and keep financial aid flowing. It was a job that allowed me to come to Oregon in 1992, where I did the exact same thing. I was the executive director of the Oregon Student Association for 4 years. Since 1996, I've dedicated my life to fighting for working people as a labor organizer for 2 different unions. First for SEIU, and then since 2004 for the Oregon Nurses Association. Since getting elected, I've worked on a lot of issues that are important to working people in my district. I was a leader in helping to pass statewide paid sick leave, raising our minimum wage, and in this last session, passing among the most forward-looking family medical leave laws in the country. I helped with the budget process in 2019, and I put more funding in for public health, which I think the wisdom of that is really bearing out right now. I led a fight against the price gouging pharmaceutical industry. It took me 2 sessions to pass a bill, and they constantly took out newspaper ads against my legislation, but we were able to pass something in 2018 and we won, and I believe it's contributing to reducing medical costs. I'm ready to stand up for renters and combat our housing crisis, which was still a thing before COVID-19. I believe in a single payer system of Medicare style for all, as Bernie Sanders has been campaigning for, and the wisdom of that kind of approach to healthcare is probably really bearing out right now. And I was proud to be part of passing the largest corporate tax increase in the history of this state to finally get back to funding schools. I feel like my life kind of got to come back full circle, because that's what I was dealing with in the 90s when I was the OSA executive director, trying to mitigate right-wing property tax measures. And then finally, and then I'll let my opponent go next, I'm ready to stand up for climate change legislation and bring a Green New Deal to Oregon. It's unfinished business that we still need to accomplish.
Can you remind us a little of your personal biography?
So I came out as a gay man in 1991. I met my husband in 1992. We've been together since August of 1992. We adopted 2 children in the year 2000. I became a grandparent a couple of years ago. I have a grandson. He's 2.5, Malachi. And as I kind of said, I've spent most of my life as a working activist, first for students and then as a labor organizer.
Great. Ms. Kreisman, could you give us your biography and why you're running for this seat?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here. My name is Paige Kreisman, and I'm running for the Oregon House here in District 42 because I think we have a lot of problems here in Oregon. We have a Democrat supermajority that was elected in large part by working class people. And in my experience the last year with the Democrat supermajority, I've found that these Democrats that brand themselves as progressive continually come up with compromises and half measures and sellouts to corporate interest. We have the most corporate spending on our elections per capita of any state in the country, and corporate interests really dominate our state legislature. So a little bit about my background. I'm currently the electoral and legislative chair for the Portland Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm a board member for Portland Tenants United. I'm also a disabled veteran. I was the first woman to serve as an indirect fire infantrywoman in the U.S. Army, which is a combat job that was previously open only to men, before I was forced out of the military by the Trump administration's trans military ban. And now I'm the first trans woman to run for the state legislature in Oregon's history. But I'm not just running to be the first trans representative. I'm running to fight for all working class Oregonians. And with that in mind, we're fighting for an Oregon Green New Deal. We're fighting for comprehensive campaign finance reform. We're fighting for tenants' rights and housing justice. And we're fighting to defend our public employees and unions, because last year our Democrat supermajority cut the pensions of our valuable public servants. And that's what got me into this race. And we're doing all this without taking any corporate money, because my only constituent is the working class people of this state.
You mentioned that the pension cuts were what got you into this race. Let's talk about that right off the bat. What about that vote by Representative Noss did you find unacceptable?
Well, this was a crisis that I do think needed to be addressed, but I was incredibly disappointed with how our Democrat supermajority addressed it. So this is a Democrat supermajority in both chambers of the legislature and a Democrat governor. I don't think it's acceptable for a Democrat, a blue state, to be cutting the pensions of teachers and nurses and firefighters, some of the most valuable public servants in our state. Public employee pensions were funded at 111% in 2006 before the recession. And when Wall Street crashed, the Public Employee Investment Fund lost that money, leading to the 79% funding we had in 2019. So it was Wall Streets and corporations that lost that money. It should be Wall Streets and corporations that pay for it, not working class people whose pensions we promised as a state of Oregon. So I understand that raising revenue is difficult in the legislature. It takes a supermajority to raise revenue and address that funding deficit through a corporate income tax or a value added tax or a gross receipts tax. But we have a Democrat supermajority. We have that supermajority for a reason. And if we're not going to use that Democrat supermajority to fight for working class people, then who is going to fight for working class people? The Republicans certainly aren't. So I think it's incredibly important that we fight right now for the identity of our party. And I believe the Democratic Party needs to be the party that fights for working class people, that fights for teachers. That's why I'm so proud to be endorsed by a broad slate of unions. Our campaign is endorsed by the Oregon Education Association, Oregon AFSCME, by the School Employees Association, by Communication Workers of America, Local 7901. And we've really brought together a broad coalition that's going to win this campaign through people power, because that's one of the biggest differences between Rob and I. The last election cycle year, Rob received less than 10% of his donations in 2018 from small individual donors. We receive all of our donations from small individual donors and unions, because my only constituent, like I said, is the working class people of this state.
Representative Noss, you want to respond? Before I have you respond, do you regret that vote? It made you a target essentially in this election cycle.
Well, it was certainly a very tough vote. I've dedicated my life to working for the labor movement. I had 4 years in a public sector union, 4 years in a private sector union with SEIU, and then Oregon Nurses Association has both public and private members. OHSU is one of the largest hospitals that we represent, and I've absolutely worked with those nurses to bargain contracts and deal with all sorts of topics. And it was a very hard vote, Aaron. And would I have preferred some other option? Absolutely. Of course I would have. But none of those other options that I would have preferred were politically viable or were going to pass. It was a very tough bill. And part of what I tried to reconcile was that I had to make a difficult decision. And I felt I was taking a vote to try to save and prop up that pension as best as we could. It has to be there for retirees who have worked very hard, who have dedicated their lives, making our streets safe, running our parks and rec, teaching our kids. And it was a tough vote. Do I wish I didn't have to vote that way? Of course I did. But
what made you decide to vote that way? I mean, granted, both of you are going to agree, I think, at least rhetorically, that the firefighters are really great people and deserve things stipulated. So what made you decide that vote had to be taken anyway?
We had to do something to deal with the cost of the pension system. And as I said, it was a really tough vote. I understand collective bargaining and retirement benefits and the financing of that very well as part of the job that I have at the Oregon Nurses Association. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions that are not popular.
Did the ONA endorse you in this cycle?
Yes, they did.
So you kept them.
I did keep them, yes. It was not an easy endorsement process, but I did keep them. And I kept UFCW and the Teamsters and some other unions as well.
Representative Noss, was there linkage in your mind between the CAT, the corporate activities tax, and the pension vote?
Can you ask that differently? What do you mean by linkage?
Well,
like only one pass about the other? Is that what you mean?
Sure. Some people have said that the reason that Democrats took the vote on 1049 and forced you and others to walk the plank was that they had to give something in order to get support to pass the corporate activities tax.
You know, Nigel, it's quite possible that there was linkage, but that sort of linkage would probably have been negotiated, frankly, at a higher level of politics than mine. I
took that vote on my own accord. It was certainly, I had a lot of consternation about it and a lot of sleepless nights about it, but it was not linked for me in passing a corporate activities tax. No one asked me to link it that way.
Representative Nasa, sorry, it's Nos, right?
No, yeah, it rhymes with dose. That's okay, Aaron.
All right, so mispronouncing it. No, that's my fault. Which endorsement in this cycle are you most proud of?
Well, I'm proud that I retained, of course, the endorsement of the Oregon Nurses Association, and I'm also very proud to have the endorsement of United Food and Commercial Workers in these COVID-19 times. Those are two endorsements that are, phenomenal to have in light of everything that we're dealing with. But I'm proud of other endorsements that I got too. I mean, I have a 100% voting record with the Oregon League of Conservation Voters for all 3 of my terms, and they endorsed me in this race. I got Basic Rights Oregon's endorsement in this race, and part of the reason I got their endorsement is I think I'm the member of the legislature that's introduced more LGBTQ legislation than any other legislator serving in the state of Oregon. And I got other endorsements too that I'm very proud of. All my endorsements I'm proud to get because they're a badge of a good seal of approval. Planned Parenthood was another one that I got.
Great. Ms. Kreisman, the same question to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm proud of absolutely every single one of my endorsements. Right now in these difficult times, one of the orgs I've been working with most closely is Oregon AFSCME, because Oregon AFSCME represents a lot of public healthcare workers in our communities who are on the front lines of this crisis. Like Oregon AFSCME represents AFSCME 328 at OHSU. And I think one of the reasons I received that endorsement is because we've seen what the centrist wing of the Democratic Party thinks of public workers last year. And now we're going into a large-scale economic crisis, and there's going to be a lot more public funding on the chopping block when we get through this and we restart our economy. And I think it's more important now than ever that our valuable public healthcare workers have people that are willing to fight for them and are willing to go to bat and not just take difficult votes, but actually go there and take a stand and say that we're going to fight for the valuable public servants in our community. But also, I'm endorsed by a lot of community activist organizations like the Portland Democratic Socialists of America, like Our Revolution, which is Bernie Sanders' organization, like Bernie PDX and Sunrise Movement, because we're fighting for an Oregon Green New Deal, which is a word I've heard Rob use a lot, but haven't heard him describe. And in fact, when we talk about climate, I'd like to hear Rob actually say what he thinks an Oregon Green New Deal is, because I certainly know exactly what that policy means, and I'd love to hear his take on it.
So, given that the PERS vote that Representative Nos took was informed somewhat by, as you pointed out, the Wall Street debacle of 2008, 2009, well, we're hitting another kind of fiscal cliff right now. State budgets for the biennium are going to take a probably $3 billion hit in the next 2 weeks. So, Ms. Kreisman, I would ask you, how do you see us weathering that without making more cuts to PERS?
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, but I think it's important that we go to bat and fight for it and center working class people exclusively. I don't think voters have to ask the question with me of where my priorities lie because I don't take any corporate money. So when I go in there and I talk to the legislative economists down in Salem and we're trying to figure out how to make the budget ends meet, the only people that I'm going to be concerned about making whole and making right are the working class people of the state. And I think we need a bailout package for working class people. And we don't need any more corporate bailouts in this country. And we need to make sure that the people on the front lines of this crisis, not just the healthcare workers, but people going into work for minimum wage at grocery stores and fast food restaurants, that those are the people that we take care of first. And then after that, then we can make sure that corporations can weather this storm as well, if we can. Now, we have a couple avenues to do that. Of course, we can raise revenue, and that's good. But we also have the kicker here in Oregon. And this year we had a huge kicker, one of the biggest kickers that we had in years. I think it's long overdue for us to get rid of that kicker so that we're not just putting money back into the 1% in corporations' pockets every single year after they pay their taxes.
Representative Nos, what do you see as the likely outcome of this budget cycle? Is it going to do the same thing to to PERS that the last cycle did?
You know, Aaron, I think we're going to have to wait and see first how all of this plays out. We get our first revenue forecast literally the day after the primary election on May 20. And I know that's what I'm going to be tuning into, win or lose, to see what our revenue situation looks like.
I mean, I can give you a preview. It's going to be bad.
Well, it might not be bad in May because we still have been collecting taxes. I think the one that we're really going to have to watch and see what happens is if we can start opening up the economy in June or July, maybe we are able to get out of this and it won't be as devastating as we're predicting at the moment. If we're still in a COVID-19 social distancing, economy closed situation over the summer, then the revenue forecast in September is going to be a lot more indicative of what it is we're going to be dealing with. And so I'm kind of keeping my powder dry, waiting to see what shows up first before I start making any prognostications about what we're going to do or not do. But I will say this, as the person who's been the budget subcommittee chair for the social safety net for the last 2 legislative sessions, that's going to be first and foremost on my mind to protect. We're going to need food stamps. We're going to need programs that help children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're going to need the Oregon Health Plan. And I'll be making sure that those programs are adequately funded.
Sorry, there's a bit of a skip on my video. We'll stick with you for a second, Representative. What's the first bill you'll introduce in the next legislative session?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the first bill that I'll introduce will be elimination of the prohibition against rent control that we have in our state.
Why?
It was a bill I worked. Why? Because I think prior to COVID-19, we were definitely living in a housing crisis. And I think that local governments should be allowed to wrestle with the topic of housing. It's really local government that does the bulk of the work in the housing space. And if our community wants to be able to enact rent control ordinances, it needs the freedom to be able to do that. That was a prohibition that was put in by the Republican legislature in the 1990s, and it needs to be removed.
Mr. Kreisman, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree that we need to lift the preemption on statewide rent control. And that's something I fought for last year with Portland DSA and with Portland Tenants United and Senate Bill 608. We missed a huge opportunity there to lift that preemption. Right now, we're in desperate need of a rent freeze to help working class people in our communities during this crisis. But that wasn't included in the bill. And when I went down there and I testified on that bill, it was incredibly clear the reason it wasn't included in it, because the landlord and realtor lobby has huge influence, and they negotiated that into the bill to make sure that that wasn't there. And, you know, I was disappointed to not see Rob out there testifying on it, but I'm glad he's came around to our point of view. And I'll be introducing a number of bills. I'll be pre-filing a number of them. Something in addressing our climate. The Oregon Green New Deal is an incredibly important proposal that we can do. Probably will be a number of bills. It's a big policy package that already exists, as well as addressing some of the civil rights issues that trans people face in this state. Because you know, it's great and amazing that I'm the first trans woman to run for state office here, but that's not just about token representation. It's about improving the material conditions of a community that's been marginalized for too long. So right now here in Oregon, trans panic defense is still legal. Right now here in Oregon, trans women are housed in men's jails and prisons. So I want to make sure that if I don't get any other bill passed, that one of the first bills that I introduced is going to serve that community that uplifted me and allowed me to represent them in this campaign. And then also limiting corporate campaign contributions, because we have the most corporate spending in our elections per capita of any state in the country. We're one of only 5 that allow unlimited corporate campaign contributions. And if elected, I'll be the only legislator in the state legislature in both chambers that doesn't take any corporate money. So I want to make sure that that we introduce legislation that's going to help other working class people like myself, because I don't come from a wealthy background. I'm a disabled veteran. I make $3,000 a month. That people like me can run for office without getting outspent 10, 15 to 1 by people like Rob, who are funded by the fossil fuel industry and by the pharmaceutical industry and by the landlord realtor lobby and by the private health insurance companies like Rob is. Because I think it's important that we address some of these big issues, but I don't think we're going to do that until we get big money out of politics.
Paige, you mentioned the Green New Deal earlier, and you wanted to speak on that. What's the most important policy proposal in the Oregon Green New Deal to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The Oregon Green New Deal is a real policy package that already exists right now. It's written and championed by the Oregon Just Transition Alliance, which is a coalition of climate advocacy groups and frontline community groups. And the Oregon Green New Deal includes a moratorium on new fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's actually a bill that was introduced in the short session that I'll just be signing on to once I'm elected. So I'm glad that we already have some leaders that are elected right now that are pursuing that.
Representative Power that introduced that bill.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. But we need to go beyond just that. So we also need to phase out existing fossil fuel infrastructure. We need regulations on forestry and agriculture, which was not part of the latest cap and trade proposal. We need investments in public transportation, and we need investments in communities already impacted by the climate crisis. And the cap and trade proposal that has been being pushed by the right wing of the Democratic Party does some of those things. And I don't outright oppose the cap and trade proposal, but at least in its current form, as it's been watered down, it doesn't do enough to address the communities that are already being impacted, and it doesn't do enough to meet the scientific needs of our climate crisis. And I think we can do a lot better than that. I think Oregonians deserve an Oregon Green New Deal that centers working class people and doesn't try to balance this corporate profit and a market-based solution with the needs of our planet. People and planet come first in my campaign, and people and planet will come first over corporate profit once elected in my office.
What do you do when the Republicans walk out again?
We fight for quorum reform. We don't need to negotiate and compromise with Republicans in this state. We have a Democrat supermajority. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's fair to the voters who elected that Democrat supermajority to act like Republicans are engaging with us in good faith and to go and sit down at the table with Republicans and negotiate them back into doing their jobs. We need to go out and prevent Republicans from being able to take out these walkouts and shut down the government. And then we need to get to work fighting for the working class people of the state and improving the material conditions of Oregonians' lives, because the Republican Party they're lost. The Republican Party is putting children in cages right now. The Republican Party is the party of hate and division, and right now the Republican Party is the party of concentration camps for children. It's not appropriate on a moral, ethical, or practical level for us to be negotiating and compromising with a party like that.
Representative Nose, where's your stance on what policy plank of the Oregon Green New Deal most interests you, and how do you keep Republicans in the building?
Well, you have to set a carbon reduction target, because if you don't set a carbon reduction target, you don't know if you're achieving your goals and getting our greenhouse gas emissions down to a level that we need so that we can have the kind of climate that we enjoy here in our state and our country and our planet. So that's the first and foremost thing that has to happen. In terms of keeping the Republicans in the legislature, I'm going to just be very honest with your listeners or viewers. We're in a little bit of a pickle, Aaron. That quorum rule is in our state's constitution. And so the only way that gets changed is if a supermajority of the legislature, because it requires a supermajority quorum to be present to do business, either changes it and then refers it to voters to vote on. And the Republicans are not going to, we're too short of a supermajority in the House, and we're too short of a supermajority in the Senate. And the Republicans are not going to cede that issue to us legislatively and allow us to make a referral to voters to vote on in November. So we have to gather signatures to collect, to make a referral ourselves. And had we not been existing in these COVID-19 social distancing thing, I would have been going door to door. In addition to asking people to vote for me to be their state representative, I would have been working with the public sector labor movement and other progressive organizations to push 2 different initiatives that would help us get at this quorum situation, so we could get back to a place where a majority of voters who elect representatives have the ability to actually run the state.
So at this point in the process, we'd like to ask each of you to ask your opponent a question. Representative Nose, I'm going to start with you. Is there a question you'd like to ask your opponent?
So Paige, you canvassed my house in your campaign, and you met my husband at the doorstep when I was out campaigning one morning, and he disagrees with me about self-serve gas. I do not want self-serve gas in Oregon. I would prefer to keep full-serve gas that we currently enjoy. And that is one issue that he wishes that I would champion differently. How do you feel about self-serve gas? Are you for it or against it?
Yeah, and thanks so much for your husband for being so nice and welcoming. I didn't realize I was knocking on your door. I thought it might be your door because it had one of your signs in the yard, but that was kind of a fun moment. But I actually agree with you on this. I think self-serve gas provides a lot of jobs, a lot of really good paying jobs here in Oregon, and it's one of the unique things that gives us our identity here in Oregon, and I think we need to keep it.
Okay, I'll let him know. He'll be disappointed. I assume that I'll get his vote again.
Well, don't count on it. We had a good conversation. Don't count on it. You might want to do a little bit of campaigning when you get home.
But I'll pass that along.
Thanks.
Paige, would you like to ask your opponent a question?
Yeah, this is something that I think a lot of people have been wondering about, Rob. And I haven't quite heard your answer on the record. But what happened to House Bill 4147? That was the bill last session to import prescription drugs from Canada. It was something that you championed for a while, and it didn't move out of committee, a committee that you are the vice chair of, the House Healthcare Committee. That's a bill that I think is really important for our communities to lower prescription drug prices. Why couldn't that get done in the short session?
Well, this is going to be kind of a wonky answer, so please bear with me. We figured out that it was going to have a fiscal of over $200,000 to be able to implement. We needed to have a situation set up with Canada where they would allow for the importation of drugs. There's only 30 million Canadians, and if Canadians are suddenly allowing for the importation of drugs into the United States at their price, it creates a problem for their market in terms of providing enough medication for the Canadian system of healthcare. And so we realized that we had more work to do if we were going to be able to work something out with Canada to be able to import drugs into our state. And so we decided that there were other more pressing priorities to fund. And we'll watch and see what happens with Vermont and Florida and some other states that got ahead of us and see if they're able to implement it before we try it here in Oregon.
Well, I think that bill's kind of interesting because it was so set up to pass. Don't you think that it's a really good idea to get it passed here in Oregon? There was really broad support for it, even among Republicans. Even the lobbyists from the healthcare industry supported it. The only people opposed to it was the pharmaceutical industry, which coincidentally is really one of the main funders of your campaign. You're the top recipient of private healthcare industry money in the entire House of Representatives. So to see one of your key signature bills die in committee was really disappointing to me. And I hear it's been attributed to you. Was it you that did you have a role?
I take my cue from how I vote on things based on checking in with the voters of Southeast Portland. And so prior to COVID-19, I was out every night talking with voters about what it was that they're concerned about. I don't take my cue about how to vote on legislation from donors. And I'm very grounded in being a parent, a grandparent, a gay man, and a trade unionist. Those are the things that inform my values and how I vote on bills. And so when I have the fiscal analysis that says it's going to cost us $200,000 to implement a bill, it will take us 2 years to work something out with Canada. We have to get permission from the Federal Food and Drug Administration to be able to do it. And there are 3 or 4 other states that are trying something. And there are other pressing needs that need to be done. I do sometimes abandon bills that I think are good ideas if they're not really going to be something that can be implemented easily when there are other pressing priorities. And that's just how it goes sometimes. So yeah, I was disappointed that my Canadian drug importation bill didn't go forward, but I understood why it wasn't a good idea. Its moment is not here for us. And that's why, hopefully we get a single payer system in this country. Hopefully we do something at the federal level where we can finally negotiate drug prices down in our own country and not rely on Canada. And then we won't have to have that bill.
Well, thanks for explaining that. I just thought the timing was very interesting because this bill died in committee just a couple weeks after you took a donation from Caremark RX. And I think that's a pattern I see with a lot of corporate funded Democrats is this constant inflow of corporate money. And then you say that there's a disconnect there with the way you vote and the way that you take actions. And maybe there is. No one else but you is going to know whether that corporate money really impacts your decisions in the
Well,
state
let
legislature.
me interrupt to ask Rob to just address that point. Did that donation have an impact on the fate of that bill?
No, of course not. Okay, we don't take corporate money when we don't take any donations. We're legislating in session. So yeah, I suppose I did get a donation from them at some point, but you can't take donations from lobbyists and constituents when you're meeting in the legislature. Okay, look, again, as I said before, and I'll say it again, all right, I take my cue from how I vote on bills based on what my constituents in Southeast and the little sliver of Northeast Portland that I represent ask me to do. Okay, I'm their representative. And I think I've done a pretty good job at that for the last 3 terms that I've served. And again, I am grounded as a parent, a gay man, and a trade unionist. I work for a healthcare union, all right? Sometimes good ideas don't make it across the finish line, and that's just how it goes. And so then you try again. It took me 2 different terms to pass price transparency against the same industry that took out a bunch of newspaper ads against my bills, all right? But eventually it got passed. And that's the honest answer. It wasn't because Caremark didn't like the bill. It's because it wasn't workable.
Okay. So,
Well, I just think it's important that voters don't have to ask that question of me.
right, I understand, but this is your chance to ask a question to him, not tell him what you think of his bill or its fate. So I'd like to have each of you offer a closing argument of why we should endorse you, and I'll start with the incumbent once again. And
okay.
last word.
I have a proven track record of getting things done in Salem. I'm a progressive champion. I've been endorsed by lots of progressive organizations and labor unions in this community. They know that I'm capable of getting things done. I know how to pass difficult bills. I understand tax policy, and I understand the budget process. And again, my values are grounded in lifting up things that help the residents of Southeast and Inner Northeast Portland. And that means better school funding, better funding for services, progressive taxes, okay? It's why I endorse Bernie Sanders, okay? This district is overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders, all right? And I didn't endorse him because it's just that it's a Bernie district. I endorsed him because he believes in the things that I believe in. And if we had more time, I'd get into the time that I met him when I was a college student in the 1980s.
All right, closing argument, Ms. Kreisman.
Thanks. And I'm also incredibly proud to call myself a progressive, but I think it's worth fighting for what that word means. And I think there's too many Democrats here in this state that find it so easy to call themselves a progressive champion while taking money from fossil fuel companies, while taking money from pharmaceutical companies and private healthcare industry, and while voting to cut the public employee pensions of teachers and nurses and firefighters. And that's what our campaign's about. Now, this isn't personal. I don't hate Rob. I think he's a good person and he has good intentions. I just have very large disagreements on what it means to be progressive. And I think a progressive champion is someone who will fight for working class people and will not make any apologies about it, who will reject corporate campaign contributions and run people-powered campaigns to take back our democracy for the working class people of this state. And that's why I'm incredibly proud to be fighting for the real policies, the Oregon Green New Deal. That's why Sunrise Movement endorsed me, fighting for the policies that Bernie Sanders movement have championed. That's why Bernie PDX and why Our Revolution is backing me. That's why the Portland Democratic Socialists of America is supporting me, because our campaign is about centering working class people. We're powered by people. We have over 600 volunteers. We knocked over 25,000 doors before we suspended our canvassing operations due to COVID-19. And that's exactly the kind of people I'm going to center in my office. Working class people, not corporations, not the 1%.
Great. I have to ask because our viewers would feel I was derelict in my duty if I didn't. What is the name of your dog?
Her name is Bassie.
Bessie.
It's so unfair. I should have brought my pets.
Bassie, is Bassie a lab?
Yes, so she's a black lab mixed with a Jack Russell. This is my child. This is my daughter. I love her very much, and she's supporting me during this COVID crisis and my quarantine, helping me call voters. I'm really grateful to have her.
Well, we have a fun question that we ask both candidates, and we'll ask both of you. What is the experience of this quarantine that you will remember forever?
Wow. You know, honestly, for me, I'm spending a lot of time, actually, I'm doing a lot more constituent work than I ever thought I would be doing. We're getting a lot of email and a lot of phone calls in my office. And I'm going to remember actually talking with about 5 or 6 different coffee shop owners, all calling me, trying to figure out how to get unemployment for their workforce, how to get unemployment for themselves, and how to navigate the SBA process.
Great. Paige, what's the experience you're going to remember?
I'm going to remember how our community came together, because this is an incredible challenge, one of the biggest challenges we've faced as a community here. And when I go out and I talk to my future constituents, and when I talk to the people in our community, I see incredible stories of resiliency and incredible stories of solidarity, people delivering groceries to their elderly neighbors, people running errands for their healthcare worker neighbors, people going out on their porches every morning and just having a conversation with social distancing across the street or to their neighbor in the other yard. And this is what I think really makes Portland great and our communities strong and resilient, is the people in our communities, because we care about one another. And those are the values that I really appreciate most about Southeast Portland.
All right. Well, thank you to both of you for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks again. Have a great
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.